On any given day, if you ask someone to remember back 14 years, some may have a little trouble remembering the details clearly. But if that day is September 11th, many people can recall the finer details of that tragic day. In this Patriot Files, we spoke to several people as they share memories of that day in September. Memories from a young officer deployed at the time, memories from a man on a plane filled with scared travelers, and memories from those who put their training to the test on the days that followed. But first, we hear from Tech Sergeant Manuel Fajardo, who was a senior in a New Jersey high school, just a short train ride from the Twin Towers. He recalled the moment a boy came running into the class with the news. The class looked out the window and saw smoke on the horizon, but something else left more of an impression on his memory.
It's not really the sight because you see it in the news, it's more of the smell of it. And the smell is just indescribable because you know what's in there, you know what's in that building or people, you know. It's one thing to be able to see it, it's just another to smell it and know what's happening. Essentially, that there's a lot of people who are about to perish.
Fajardo said his first concern was if he knew anybody who worked in that building.
I didn't, but I knew somebody in the airplane who crashed, whose grandmother was in that airplane, who perished. I guess it hit the first building, from what I understand. You get a sense of retribution. You wanna do something about it at the same time, but felt like you couldn't because you're in high school.
His pride for his country led him down a new path.
Within a month later, I went to see a recruiter, and then by January, I was doing my first enlistment, swearing in, and then the recruiter gave me a date of when I wanted to go to basic, and I chose September 10, 2002, because that was the next date available, just to make my service most memorable.
Our next story comes from Colonel Kevin Cullen, then a young Air Force captain deployed to Egypt in support of Exercise Bright Star. He wasn't informed through breaking news reports or pictures on social media. The base was still being built and communications were hard to come by.
Most people that day were out in at the air bases. They were bare bases. In fact, the only communications we had was one SIPRNet laptop computer. We had no phones, we had no televisions, and the word first spread by word of mouth. Came down that 2 planes had hit the World Trade Center towers, and both towers were down. And if you can imagine not being able to watch it on television, not being able to see it, it was really, really hard to believe.
That disbelief turned to concern for loved ones as word spread like wildfire.
Yeah, it was tough and it was frustrating, and we had a lot of young airmen there. One of the things that we did do, we were finally able to get our hands on a satellite Iridium phone, and at the time it was really, really expensive to make phone calls on that phone. But we were able to get the phone around to most people, let them make a quick phone call back home. Just one, to make sure their family members were okay, and then two, to reassure their family members that they too were okay in Egypt.
Even during the most stressing times, pride and perseverance kept them going strong.
We focused on the mission as much as we can. We really built up a number of bases. Eventually the exercise restarted, and then really what happened was the exercise kind of transformed into the opening stages of Operation Enduring Freedom.
That pride for country rallied the nation once more.
I think really what we just saw is another example of the greatest generation. The airmen and the other service members that wanted to serve because of 9/11, we've seen that that's what makes America so great and America so strong.
Daniel Collins shares a similar chaotic story of being out of the information loop. As a relatively new Air Force staff sergeant, he was headed home for his grandfather's funeral and was only an hour into his flight when his plane diverted.
Pilot came on over the intercom and said, "We have an in-flight emergency. We need to land," and everyone was baffled. And he also said that there was nothing wrong with the aircraft. So we're like stunned that, what's going on? And nobody knew anything. because they couldn't use your cell phones.
Once the plane landed, passengers headed towards baggage claim, confused and worried by excess security.
There had to be at least, 100 to 200 officers. And they were letting us through, but wasn't letting anyone go into the airport. So luckily I went straight to the passenger terminal, got the voucher, set up a hotel. I was one of the very few, I guess, to get lucky to get a hotel. Then checked in at the hotel, turned on the TV, and then that's when I received the news, or saw the news like everyone else, that the aircraft were crashed into the World Trade Center.
Since all flights were grounded, he wasn't able to catch a flight until 3 days later. It was clear on that flight that the world had changed.
Nobody was really saying anything. They were just looking around. You could hear a pin drop. I mean, it was just silence. As the day has just changed America and changed the way we travel, and it's changed our lives forever. It's it's as significant as December 7th. So September 11th I believe, will be another day that will live in infamy, just like December 7th has.
After returning to Beale Air Force Base in California, he deployed 2 weeks later in support of U-2 operations in the Middle East. For our final story, we hear from Lieutenant Colonel Monty Baker, a clinical psychologist who had just joined the Air Force and was in his first week of residency training at Andrews Air Force Base, Maryland.
We were all at Andrews at that time, and just sort of sitting around. I think we'd all gathered around like the cafeteria, and there was TVs in that area, and we were all just sort of shocked. It was kind of surreal that this was actually really truly happening. And then, of course, being at Andrews Air Force Base, the president was supposed to be inbound to that location, and hearing that, hey, there may be somebody there may be another plane that's headed to Andrews. It was a scary situation at that point.
After news that a plane had crashed into the Pentagon came out, he quickly realized his training would be needed during the aftermath.
I was able to go with a couple other staff members to work with the families, and that meant working the support groups, and then also going on the buses with the families to the crash site.
After getting on site and seeing damage to a building that many believed was impervious, the operations were anything but hectic.
You would think it'd be chaos, but it wasn't. It was actually very well organized, and this is maybe that military influence, because they named the operation that sort of responded to this crisis, and had people that were in designated roles to assist, and so it wasn't chaotic, people running all over. It was sort of organized chaos in a way. People had specific roles to help out, and it was well done.
After spending time with families who lost loved ones and helping them through the grieving process, the resiliency people had to tragedy impressed him. He also realized that the tragedy affected more than just the people he helped.
Mental health people are not immune to that too. I think often medical people in general sometimes forget to take care of themselves, and I was fortunate. The staff members, the supervisors that I went with, they made sure they were asking, am I okay, and doing things to take care of myself during that time. And so I had a good support system, and I think that's how medical people in particular deal with it. They talk to colleagues, supervisors, other medical people to kind of talk through some of those experiences. And again, sharing a story, just like here, is very powerful. And when you tell your story and you say it over and over again, it sometimes makes it a little easier to deal with.
It is in sharing those stories that we are able to come together and heal, and ensure that even 14 years later, we will never forget.